and everything began to change. When Lena pressed the first note, it was soft enough that it almost blended into the quiet air of the hall. But something about the sound made a few people lift their heads. Maybe it was the gentleness of her touch, or the way the note lingered for an extra moment, warm and steady. Lena didn't rush. She let her fingers settle into the second note, then a third, forming a slow melody that moved like a calm breath. At first she stayed with something simple, just as she had promised. But even simple sounded different when she played it. She added tiny details, little emotions. Barely visible changes in pressure that made the music feel alive. The hall had been full of complaints and scattered conversations a few minutes ago. But now the noise gradually faded. People leaned back in their chairs, not sure what they were hearing, but sensing it wasn't just random playing. Lena kept her eyes down, focused on the keys as if she and the piano existed in a world, separate from the crowd. She didn't think about the guests who had laughed. She didn't think about the ones who were still waiting for her to mess up. Instead, she remembered all the quiet afternoons she spent with old, dusty pianos moments she had never shared with anyone. The music she carried inside her flowed out naturally, almost effortlessly. Slowly, she began to shift into a second melody. It was like telling another part of the same story. A few guests straightened in their chairs, now realizing she wasn't just filling time. She was playing with a depth that didn't match her uniform or the assumptions they had made about her. One older guest whispered to the person next to him, "She's actually good." Another nodded, eyes still fixed on the stage. "Well, better than I expected," someone else murmured. Trying not to sound too impressed, Lena didn't hear them. She was too focused on the keys, too lost in something only she could see. Her fingers grew more confident, moving from note to note with ease. She shifted into a slightly faster rhythm. It wasn't dramatic or showy, but it showed skill. It showed control. The organizer, who had been standing near the stage with a worried expression earlier, now watched with a look of surprise that slowly softened into relief. She whispered to a nearby staff member, "She never told me she could play like this." The staff member simply shrugged. Amazed, Lena finished the first full piece with a gentle closing line, the final note fading like a sigh. For a moment, the hall was silent, not confused this time, but genuinely quiet, as if the crowd were waking up from a dream. She could have stopped there. But something inside her felt unfinished. She hadn't planned to play more. She hadn't planned any of this. But in that moment, she felt like this was her one chance to show a part of herself. She had kept hidden for years, so she breathed deeply and began playing again. This time, the melody was warmer, softer, and more emotional. It carried a hint of something personal, maybe the hope she always held on to, or the loneliness she kept tucked away. People who had been distracted before now leaned forward. Some guests who were halfway through conversations paused mid-sentence. The sound traveled around the room, reaching the edges, touching the corners, filling spaces that had felt too big a moment ago. It didn't matter that she didn't come from a music school. It didn't matter that she had no certificates, no polished resume, no mentor. What she had was something honest, something real, and that was what people felt. A couple sitting near the front exchanged a look. Why didn't anyone tell us about her? Maybe no one knew, the other whispered back. A man sitting farther away raised his phone. Not to record her failure, but to capture something unexpected. Something worth remembering, Lena continued. Moving into another section of the music that required more skill, her fingers danced across the keys, but not in a flashy way. Every movement had meaning. Every shift in volume or speed was deliberate. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just telling a story the best way she knew how. She didn't know it, but the entire room had changed. Those who had laughed earlier now watched with quiet amazement. Those who had judged her for her uniform or her role now saw something entirely different. They saw someone who had depth. Someone who had something special to offer, something they never expected. The organizer stood straighter now, her panic replaced by pride. She hadn't planned any of this, but she was grateful it was happening. Lena was saving the night in a way no one else could have, but Lena didn't see any of it. She stayed caught in the world she created between her hands and the piano. Then, midway through the piece, she made a small mistake. One wrong note. It was enough to make her fingers freeze for a second. Her breath caught. For a moment, the fear returned, fear of failing, fear of being judged, fear of proving the doubters right. A few guests noticed the hesitation, but no one reacted harshly. They waited. Lena closed her eyes for a brief moment. She reminded herself why she was there, not for them. Not to impress or prove anything, but because the music mattered to her. Because it was a voice she never got to use anywhere else. When she opened her eyes again, she continued, smoothly, softly, picking up the melody as if nothing had happened. Some guests nodded quietly, impressed not by perfection, but by her grace under pressure. A young woman seated near the middle whispered, "She plays like she feels everything." Her companion nodded. Not many can do that. By the time Lena reached the end of her second piece, the room had grown warm with emotion. Her last note lingered, floating through the hall, gently fading before the silence came. A different kind of silence. Not confused, not impatient, not judgmental. A respectful silence then. Slowly, a few hands began to clap. It started from the middle of the room, then spread to the sides, then to the front. The applause grew louder, rolling through the hall until almost everyone joined in. Lena lifted her hands from the keys and placed them gently in her lap. She looked up, unsure, hesitant. She had expected to be dismissed. She had expected criticism or awkwardness. This warmth felt almost unreal. Some guests stood from their seats. Not all, but enough to make her heart race. She didn't know where to look. She didn't know how to respond. She felt small and overwhelmed, but in a completely different way than earlier. She stood slowly and bowed her head once. Not a deep bow, just a simple acknowledgement. The applause grew as if they understood her quiet nature and appreciated it. When she stepped off the stage, a few staff members smiled at her, some with wide eyes, some with gentle nods. They had worked with her for months, yet they were seeing her as if for the first time. The organizer hurried to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Lena, I had no idea," she said softly. "You were incredible. You saved the evening." Lena shook her head lightly. "I just played. That's all." "No," the organizer replied. "You did more than that." Before Lena could say anything else, a small group of guests approached. These were the same people who earlier had doubted her, laughed at her suggestion, or looked at her like she didn't belong. Now they stood in front of her, with softened expressions. One of them cleared his throat. "That was impressive. Truly." Another nodded. "You have real talent." Lena didn't know what to say. Compliments were not something she heard often, especially not from people like them. "Thank you." "Shh," she whispered. The guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure how to say more. They weren't used to being wrong about someone like her. After they left, Lena stepped aside, finding a quiet corner where she could breathe. She placed her palm over her chest, feeling her heartbeat still racing. She didn't feel like a star or a hero. She just felt relieved that she hadn't embarrassed herself. Relieved that she had shared something true. Relieved that she had finally allowed her music to be heard as she stood there. A few more guests came by to offer kind words. Some told her she had touched their hearts. Others simply nodded at her with respect. It was strange being seen. Truly seen. A part of her still wondered if she had imagined it all. But then she noticed something. People weren't talking about the canceled performer anymore. They weren't complaining. They weren't looking bored or frustrated. They were talking about her. The quiet girl who worked behind the scenes, the girl no one noticed. The girl who sat down at the grand piano and changed the entire mood of the night. And for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel small. She didn't feel like a background character in a world too big for her. For the first time, Lena felt like she belonged, not because of her clothes or her role, but because of the truth she had shared through her music. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if people would remember her tomorrow or if everything would go back to normal. But tonight, she had taken a step she'd never imagined this would take. And the night wasn't over yet. There was still more to come, more surprises, more reactions, more moments that would shape what happened after. But Lena didn't know any of that yet. All she knew, as she stood in her quiet corner, was that something inside her had changed, for the first time in a long time. She felt proud of herself, and the room filled with people who once ignored her had finally seen the light she had carried. Quietly for years, that was enough for now. More than enough. Lena stayed in the corner for a few minutes, letting herself settle after the unexpected wave of emotions that came with playing on a stage in front of people who never imagined she could do something ending. Her heartbeat was still a little fast, and her hands, though steady now, carried the memory of trembling at the start. She kept her head slightly down, trying not to draw more attention to herself. But the room around her had changed in a way she couldn't ignore. People were still talking about her performance. Some spoke softly, almost as if they didn't want to disturb the air that still carried the echo of her music. Others spoke more openly, sharing their surprise or excitement. Many of them kept glancing toward the corner where she stood, probably wondering if she would play again, or if she had simply disappeared after giving them something unexpected. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do next. She had stepped onto the stage only to help the organizer and calm the upset guests. That was all. She had planned to go back to her duties right after, maybe carry trays again, or adjust the table settings. But now she didn't know where she fit. She didn't feel like the girl who walked in through the back door anymore. Yet she didn't feel like she belonged among the guests either. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you the one who played?" Lena looked up. It was a woman in a long silver dress, someone she had seen earlier speaking with confidence and elegance. Now the woman stood in front of her with a gentle smile. "Yes," Lena replied quietly. "I just wanted to say your music was beautiful," the woman said. "It felt real. It felt honest. You moved the room in a way I don't think the original performer could have." Lena wasn't used to compliments, especially not one said with sincerity like this. She nodded politely. "Thank you. I'm glad you liked it." The woman smiled again and returned to her group. But the interaction left Lena standing a little straighter. If people like her people who lived in a world far above hers could speak to her with kindness, then maybe the invisible, while she always felt, wasn't as tall as she believed. She hadn't taken more than 2 steps when another voice reached her. "You play very well." This time it was an older man. Someone she had noticed earlier giving orders to servers as if he owned the place. Now he looked at her with calm respect. "Thank you," Lena said again. I'm sure how many times she'd repeat those 2 words tonight. "You studied professionally?" "No," she said softly. "I learned on my own." The man looked surprised. "On your own. That's remarkable." Another compliment. Another weight lifting off her chest. Within minutes, a few more guests came to speak with her. Some asked if she played often. Some asked what inspired her. Others simply wanted to let her know she gave them a moment they didn't expect. Lena answered each person gently, always trying to stay humble even though inside she felt something warm rising. Something close to pride. But not everyone was impressed in the same way. In the far corner of the hall, a group of younger guests watched her with mixed expressions. They were the same ones who had laughed earlier, who had doubted her before she even touched the keys. Now their pride seemed bruised, and one of them whispered loudly enough that Lena heard, "She practiced one piece. Doesn't mean she's anything special." Another shrugged. "Probably just lucky," a third added. "Let's see her try something difficult." Lena didn't react. She had already learned that not everyone would clap for her, and she didn't need everyone to. The applause she had received earlier was enough to stay with her for a lifetime. Still, the comments followed her like a shadow. Even though she tried to ignore them, she could feel their eyes watching her. Waiting for her to prove she wasn't worthy of the praise she was getting, the organizer soon approached her again, a grateful smile still on her face. "Lena, you truly saved us tonight." "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," Lena replied simply. "No, really?" the organizer insisted. "I've gotten at least a dozen people asking about you, who you are, where you studied, whether you'll perform again." I didn't know what to say. Lena didn't know what to say either. She wasn't a performer. She didn't even consider music a career. She had always played in quiet spaces just for herself, Being asked about like this felt strange, almost unreal. "If you want to go home early, I can arrange it," the organizer added. "You've done more than enough." But Lena shook her head. "I still have work to finish." The organizer blinked, surprised. "Work? After all that?" "Yes," Lena said softly. "I don't want to leave things incomplete." For a moment, the organizer looked speechless. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, but you don't have to work alone. Take your time." Lena went back, toward the service area, relieved to move away from the spotlight. She felt safer behind the scenes, where the lights weren't so bright and the attention wasn't heavy on her shoulders. But the staff members she passed looked at her differently now. A server approached her, smiling shyly. "Lena, that was amazing." "I didn't know you could play like that," another young worker added. "I wish I had half your talent," someone else said. "You were the highlight of the night." Hearing these words from people who worked just as hard as she did meant more to her than the applause from the guests. They knew her world. They understood her struggles. Their respect felt deeper and more genuine as she continued arranging supplies and helping staff members prepare for the next part of the evening. She found herself thinking about all the years she had spent playing for no one. All the afternoons she had hoped someone would hear her. All the moments she doubted whether her music meant anything at all. Now, suddenly, people were seeing what she had kept hidden. She carried a small box of table decorations toward the hallway when she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey," a man's voice said. Lena turned. It was one of the younger guests, the same ones who had mocked her before her performance. He had a smirk on his face, but it wasn't playful. More like he was trying to prove something. "You surprised everyone out there?" he said, as if the words tasted strange in his mouth. "Didn't expect someone like you to play like that." Lena stayed calm. "Thank you," she said politely. He chuckled. "Relax. I'm not here to insult you. I'm actually curious." He stepped closer. "Can you play something harder? Something fast? Something that shows real skill?" Lena blinked. "I didn't come to perform. I came to work." "Oh, come on," he said, waving his hand. "You got the room clapping? Surely you can do more than those soft pieces." His tone was challenging, not admiring. He wasn't asking because he respected her talent. He was asking because he wanted to see her fail. Before Lena could respond, another young woman from the same group joined them. "Seriously," she said. "Everyone's praising you, but I bet you memorized one piece. Anyone can sound good for 5 minutes." The comments stung, but not in the way they would have earlier in her life. Lena had already proven herself to the room. She didn't need to prove anything to them. "I'm not here to compete," she said gently. "I just wanted to help." The man raised an eyebrow. "So that's a no?" Lena didn't answer directly. Instead, she carried the box past them and headed back into the hallway. She didn't want conflict. She didn't want anger. She wanted peace, but part of her also felt a flicker of defiance. Deep inside, a quiet voice saying she could do more if she wanted to. That she wasn't afraid of fast pieces or difficult melodies. That she had a range those guests couldn't imagine. Still, she kept moving. The night wasn't over, and she didn't want unnecessary trouble. Yet as she walked away, she overheard them mutter, "I knew it. She got lucky. Just a simple girl with one song." People overreact to anything emotional. Lena paused for a second, but she didn't turn around. She simply took a deep breath and continued walking. Later, when she returned to the main hall, the atmosphere had shifted again. Many guests were now calm, relaxing in their seats, talking about their lives, food, and business. But every now and then, someone would come up to her to say they admired her courage or that her music reminded them of something personal. Each time, she thanked them politely, still feeling slightly overwhelmed. Soon the organizer approached her again. "Lena, would you be open to playing one more piece later tonight?" she asked carefully. "Only if you feel comfortable." Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure. The first performance had come from instinct, courage, and a need to help. Playing again felt like entering unfamiliar territory. What if she made mistakes? What if expectations were higher now? But a server passing by whispered, "You should do it. People loved you." Another encouraged her gently, "Just be yourself." Lena felt something warm settle inside her chest. Maybe this night wasn't just about helping others. Maybe it was also about trusting herself, about believing she had something worthy to share, I think. She began softly, then paused, gathering courage. "Yes, I can play again." The organizer smiled with relief. "Wonderful. We'll prepare the stage for you later." As Lena stepped back into the hall, she noticed the same group of guests who doubted her earlier still watching her from a distance. Their expressions unreadable. Maybe annoyed. Maybe curious. Maybe waiting. But Lena didn't care anymore. She had spent too many years being quiet because she feared judgment. Tonight, she realized judgment didn't define her. Her music did. She wasn't done yet. The night still had a place for her, and her story quiet, humble, and unexpected was only beginning to unfold. The applause slowly faded as the evening moved into a short break. But the energy in the hall still felt like electricity hanging in the air. People talked quietly, yet their conversations carried a kind of excitement that had not been there earlier. Some spoke about the unexpected moment on stage. Some whispered about the young woman who had walked into the elite circle almost unnoticed. It was clear that something had changed, even if only a few were ready to admit it. She stood near one of the tall pillars in the corridor, trying to blend in with the crowd. Her chest was still rising and falling from the performance. She was calm on the outside, but her hands felt warm from the keys, as if the music she had just played was still running inside her. She did not want attention. All she wanted was a simple evening, a place to sit quietly and maybe a chance to play the piano once. She never planned to shake the room the way she accidentally did. A server walked by, offering small dessert cups on a tray. She politely took one, even though she was not hungry. It was easier to look occupied than to stand still and draw more eyes. But people were already watching her. She tried not to look back at them near the far end of the corridor. A group of well-dressed guests whispered, not realizing their voices carried across the marble walls. One of them said something that made the others laugh, but the laughter sounded different, now less like mockery, more like shock mixed with pride that they had witnessed something rare. Even if they had laughed at her earlier, they now watched her as if she held some secret they had overlooked. The older man from earlier, the one who had spoken to her before she performed, approached her again. His smile was softer this time, almost apologetic. He placed his hands behind his back as he stopped in front of her. "You surprised many people tonight?" he said gently. "I didn't mean to," she replied. "I just wanted to play." "That," he said, "is what made it special." For a moment she did not know what to say. Compliments felt strange, especially from people who had judged her so quickly just an hour earlier. She nodded quietly and looked away, hoping to end the conversation without sounding rude, but the man wasn't finished. "I think," he added, "you will be asked to play again."
"No."
She shook her head. "I don't want to take the stage away from anyone. They invited the world's best tonight," the man said. "But sometimes greatness arrives quietly." She didn't know how to respond, so she gave a small smile and thanked him again. When he left, she breathed out slowly and moved toward a quieter side of the hall where large curtains were drawn near tall windows. She sat on a cushioned bench and looked outside. The city lights shimmered below like scattered stars on the ground. She remembered her early years, the tiny place where she first learned to play, the old upright piano that her mother had repaired many times, the long evenings when she played until her fingers hurt. She remembered the way people in her hometown looked at her, some with admiration, some with confusion. She always felt music in her bones, not as something she chose, but as something she was born with. It carried her through lonely days and silent nights. But she never imagined being in a hall like this, surrounded by people who thought they owned the world. She whispered softly to herself, "Why did I even come here?" But she already knew the answer. She had accepted the invitation because she wanted to face something bigger than her quiet world. She wanted to see if she truly belonged in a place where people talked about perfection, but rarely looked for soul. Her thoughts were interrupted when a woman in a silver dress approached. She was older, graceful, and carried herself with a kind of elegance that required no effort. "May I sit here?" the woman asked. She nodded and moved slightly to give space. The woman sat beside her, folding her scarf gently over her lap. "You played beautifully," the woman said after a moment. "Not perfect, but beautiful, and that matters more." The young woman looked at her, surprised at the honesty in her tone. "Thank you," she said. "Most people here seem to care about perfection." "Yes," the woman replied with a quiet sigh, "but perfection without feeling is empty." Tonight, they felt something, whether they admit it or not. "Did you?" she asked softly. The woman smiled warmly. "I did, and that is why I want to ask something important." The young woman waited. "Are you planning to continue playing publicly? Or was tonight just a one-time thing?" She looked down at her hands, thinking, "I don't know. I never had many chances. I play where I can. When I can." The woman studied her for a moment. "You should think bigger." The words struck something in her. They were simple words, but they carried weight. She wondered if the woman knew how heavy they felt, before she could respond. A soft chime echoed through the hall, signaling the second half of the evening program. People began to return to their seats inside the main hall. The woman stood up slowly. "Come," she said kindly. "They will want to see you again." The young woman blinked. "Me? But I'm not performing again." The woman's smile widened. "You think so? Let's see." Her heart began to beat faster. "Did someone ask me to play again?" "Not yet," the woman said. "But they will. Trust me." "Why do you believe that?" "Because some rare moments don't happen twice," the woman explained, "and people always want to capture them again." The woman walked away, leaving her thoughts tangled. She followed the crowd back into the hall, her steps slow and unsure. She found her seat near the side and sat down quietly, hoping the attention would shift to the next performer. The lights dimmed, and the host walked on stage with a smile that looked slightly too excited. He spoke with more energy than before, as if he knew the night had taken an unexpected turn. The next performers played beautifully, each one skilled and confident. But even with their talent, the room felt different now. People listened, yes, but there was a quiet tension in the air, feeling that everyone was waiting for something that had not yet happened again. During a brief transition between performers, the host glanced toward her. His eyes widened slightly, as if he had just realized something. He whispered something to the backstage crew, then turned back toward the audience with a subtle grin. She felt a wave of nervousness rising. Something was happening. Something she did not ask for at the end of the next piece. The host walked center stage again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight has already given us incredible music. But every now and then, a moment surprises even us." We witnessed something earlier that touched many hearts in this room. Her stomach tightened, and if she is willing, the host continued, "We would like to invite our unexpected guest back to the stage for one more piece." The room erupted with applause, louder than before. People turned to look at her. She felt her face grow warm, her pulse pounding in her neck. She wanted to shrink into her seat, but at the same time, something inside her stirred a familiar pull. The call of music asking to be answered. She rose slowly, her legs trembling slightly. As she walked toward the aisle, a young boy near the edge whispered to his father, "Is that her? The one who played earlier?" His father nodded silently, eyes full of expectation. She stepped into the aisle. The applause grew stronger. Every eye in the hall followed her. Every whisper faded. Every doubt she had carried for years began to quiet. She reached the steps leading to the stage. And as she placed her foot on the first step, her entire journey from the broken old piano of her childhood to the laughter she heard earlier tonight flashed briefly through her mind. If they wanted her to play again, she would not hold back this time. Lena stepped onto the stage again, but this time the walk felt completely different. Earlier, she had walked like a shadow, slipping past people who barely noticed her. Now, every step felt like it carried weight. The applause rose gently at first, then grew louder as she reached the piano. She could feel the warmth of the lights above her, soft but bright enough to make her blink. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She wasn't used to people expecting something from her. Her whole life had been shaped by quiet rooms, worn-out keys, and hours spent practicing when no one was around to watch. She had never imagined a moment like this. The hall went silent. She placed her hands on the keys. For a second, she closed her eyes and let herself remember where everything began, the small room where she learned to play. The broken piano her mother patched by hand, the nights when she thought no one would ever hear her music. All of it gathered inside her chest like a spark ready to become fire. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft,
Almost.
like a whisper. They drifted into the air and floated above the crowd. Her fingers moved with a calm confidence that surprised even her. She had played this piece many times before, but tonight it felt new. She wasn't just playing notes, she was speaking through them. The room leaned in, as if listening to a secret only she could tell. The melody swelled gently, rising like a wave that lifted the entire audience with it. Lena felt something shift inside her. She wasn't nervous anymore. The music was guiding her, carrying her through the air the same way a bird trusts the wind. She let the sounds fill the room, each note glowing with the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. Some people in the front row closed their eyes. Others leaned forward, elbows on knees, trying to catch every movement of her hands. A young girl near the aisle was holding her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide with wonder. Even the host, who usually smiled through everything, stood completely still, watching her as if he knew he was witnessing something rare. As she continued, the piece became more powerful. Her fingers flew across the keys in a long, tumbling run of notes that shimmered through the hall. She felt the intensity pour out of her. It was as if all the quiet years, all the moments people overlooked her, all the times she doubted herself, everything was turning into sound. When she reached the middle of the piece, the tempo slowed. The melody softened again, fragile and gentle. It felt like a moment of stillness in the middle of a storm. She let the notes breathe, letting the silence between them speak as loudly as the sound. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. She played the final section with a kind of peaceful confidence. The last notes floated out into the air and held there for a second before fading. When the sound finally disappeared, the silence felt alive. Then the applause exploded. It wasn't the polite kind of applause that people give because they feel they should. It was full, strong, honest. People stood up almost in unison. It felt like a wave rising from every corner of the hall. Some clapped with their hands above their heads. Some whistled. Some shouted her name. She sat frozen on the bench for a moment, overwhelmed by the sound. She rose slowly, bowing her head once, then again when the applause grew louder. She could feel her eyes sting a little, but she blinked the feeling away. She didn't want to cry on stage. Not tonight. Not when she had finally done something she didn't believe she could do. When she walked off the stage, she was met by the event organizer, who looked at her with pure amazement. He didn't speak immediately. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and gave a small, grateful nod. She nodded back, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to praise like this. She didn't know how to receive it. The backstage area filled with people wanting to greet her. They asked where she learned to play, how long she had practiced, why she never performed earlier. Some of them touched her arm gently as they spoke, as if making sure she was real and not a moment they imagined. She fumbled through her answers, speaking softly but honestly. "I practiced at home," she said. "I learned on a broken piano, but it worked well enough. I never had a proper teacher. I just kept playing." Her words surprised them. They looked at her with wide eyes, almost disbelieving what they heard. Many of them had spent years and money on lessons, schools, and tutors. To hear that this quiet young woman had risen from such simple beginnings made her performance feel even more meaningful to them. A tall man in a dark suit stepped forward. He was well known in the music world, though Lena did not fully recognize him at first. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You have something rare," he said. "Technique can be learned. Discipline can be taught. But feeling, that cannot be created. You already have it." Lena bowed her head slightly, grateful, but unsure how to answer. Compliments still felt heavy to her, as if she wasn't ready to carry them. But the way he spoke was gentle, almost respectful. She appreciated that. "Thank you," she said quietly. The woman in the silver dress who had spoken to her earlier approached next. She took Lena's hands in her own, her eyes warm with pride. "I told you," the woman whispered. "People would want more from you." Lena smiled softly. "I didn't expect this." "Life rarely tells us what is waiting," the woman replied. "But when the moment comes, you must step into it." And you did. After a while, the crowd backstage thinned. People slowly returned to the main hall, still talking about her performance. The host returned to finish the event, leaving Lena standing in the quiet corridor near the large windows again. She walked toward the glass and looked out at the city lights below. The view felt different now. The lights seemed less distant, less unreachable, almost like they were calling to her instead of watching her from far away. She thought again about her childhood, her years of practicing, the many nights she wondered if she was wasting her time. She remembered how some people told her that music was not a stable path, that dreams like hers were too big for someone like her. She remembered the doubts she carried, the quiet tears she hid, the fear that she would never escape the smallness of her life. But tonight, the world had opened a door for her. She hadn't asked for it, but she had stepped through it anyway. The event ended soon after. People walked past her, some stopping to congratulate her again. They spoke kindly, warmly, almost admiringly. No one laughed at her anymore. No one doubted her anymore. The shift was so sudden and strange that she didn't know how to process it. But she accepted it quietly, storing each kind word like a tiny light inside her. When she finally stepped outside the building, the night air touched her skin like a cool breeze. She stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply. Cars passed by. A couple walked hand in hand across the street. The world felt bigger than ever, yet somehow it felt closer too. She walked slowly down the steps, feeling the weight of the night settle around her, not heavy, but comforting. She felt different, stronger, more sure of herself than she had ever been. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She looked up at the sky. The stars were faint behind the city lights, but they were there. She smiled softly to herself. People had laughed at her. People had doubted her. People had dismissed her before she even touched the keys. But once she played, everything changed. She had shown them who she was, not with words, but with music, and now the world felt wide open. Lena took a step forward into the night, knowing this was only the beginning.